All right, so hopefully you got that last lesson down really good, because we're going to expand upon it. In this next lesson, we're going to learn about what to do if you want a note that doesn't last for 1 beat or 2 beats or a half a beat. How do we get like 1.5 beats? And the way we do that is we use a thing called a tie. Now, when you see a tie, it'll look like an arc that goes between 2 notes. And what it means is that the second of the two, for you, the second of the two, you don't strike it again, you hold it. So for example, if you have a quarter note tied to an eighth note, and what we would do is we would actually call that a tied quarter note. Assuming, a tied quarter note doesn't always mean that it's tied to an eighth note, but for our purposes right now, we know that it's tied to an eighth note. So I'm just going to call it a tied quarter note. So if I have a tied quarter note, I'm actually going to go, 1 and, or quarter, and then let's say it's tied to an eighth note pair. So it's actually only tied to the first of the 2 eighth notes. The beam that connects the eighth notes doesn't interfere with the tie. So I would go eighth and not strike it, and then note, and I would strike the one that comes back up. So if you look at this next example that we have, example 2-1, you'll see that it starts off with a quarter note, so quarter, or 1 and. 2, I don't strike that eighth note because it's tied to the quarter note, and. So really what it boils down to is you need to keep in mind that it's quarter tied eighth, something like that. 1 and 2 and 3 and skip because of the tie, and 1 and skip because of the tie, and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So hopefully you kind of get a feel for how that goes, and you can actually kind of stack these ties together as we do in the next one, and it'll go something like this. So we have 1 and skip because of the tie, and now we're going to skip the quarter note from the tie. So 3 I'll skip, and because I wouldn't hit that anyway in the middle of a quarter note, 4 and. So again, it's 1 and 2 I skip because of the tie, and 3 I skip because of the tie, and I skip because we're in the middle of a quarter note. 4 and. One more time. 1 and 2 I skip because of the tie, and 3 I skip because of the tie, and I skip because I'm in the middle of a quarter note. 4 and. So let me put that all together for you. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And a little bit faster, you'll hear this really creates what we call syncopation, which is when we're kind of emphasizing the up beats, or the ands as we call them. So take a listen to what this sounds like if I go a little faster. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And obviously if I were to change chords a little bit more on that, it would sound really, really pretty cool. So by using a tie, we can get what I call the most popular strum in the world. And I don't call it the most popular strum in the world lightly. I've over the years, I've been a guitar teacher now for 25 years or more, actually more than 25 years. And I've taught thousands of songs in that amount of time, and I'm not kidding when I say this strum comes up more than any other strum. Now, I've taught this strum, I think, in probably half the courses I've made at some point I teach this strum because it really is that popular. It's used in folk music, it's used in country music, it's used in blues music, it's used in rock music, it's used in even hard rock like punk music. It's everywhere in some way, shape, or form. So it's really, really, really important that you be able to do this. In addition to calling it the most popular strum in the world, I sometimes call it the brown-eyed girl strum because it's the type of strum I would use to play a standard mid-tempo, traditional time song like Brown-Eyed Girl, Margaritaville. There are dozens of others, like I've mentioned, but those are the types of songs that I'm talking about. So hopefully you've heard of those. So let's kind of walk through it. It starts off with a quarter note, so that's 1 and. Then we have the eighth note pair, 2 and. We skip 3, and that's the secret to this strum. We come up on the and. The reason we skip 3 is because of the tie. We come up on the and 4 and. Now I'm putting a quarter note at the end of the pattern. You'll see later we can do an eighth note pair as well. So I have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Let's do a little bit faster. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now, silly as it might sound, if I were going to tell you to do one thing and do it a lot and don't do anything else, it would be that strum. You can literally sit in front of a television set and just do this. Just pick a chord. That should be so easy. It's just got to feel good. You get the head bob going, maybe get a foot tap. That strum needs to just absolutely flow out of you. So if it feels a little bit complicated right now, don't worry. And don't do it by ear. This is a really common mix-up with this is people don't keep that right arm moving, and so you get something like this, which to an untrained ear sounds the same. But I'll tell you a little story. I'll make it quick. When I used to teach at a music store all the time, one of the music stores I used to teach at, my room was at the end of the hall, and there was about a 15-foot hall, and at the front was water fountain. So I would have the student go in the room and play that, and I would be down at the other end of the hall getting a drink of water or making a cup of coffee or whatever, and they would start doing this. And I would hear it from the other end of the hall, and I'd say, no, that's not right. And as you can imagine, that would really, really surprise a student. It's because, like I say, to an untrained ear, that's going to sound correct, but it's not. And anybody who knows the difference is going to hear that doesn't sound right. And it's not going to sound right really to anyone who's a listener. It might fool you when you're trying to play it. You might go, yeah, that's it. It's not, though. It's not quite. And somebody who's listening to it, it won't ever sit in the pocket quite as well. And it's a subtle difference, but it's an important one. So I hope I can emphasize to you to keep that right arm strumming and not try and pull something like 1 and 2 and 3, where this is just kind of going randomly as it needs to. Now, as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, I had put a quarter note at the end of that strum pattern, but you can do 2 eighth notes, and when you do that, you get something like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. All right. Now, that's kind of cool, and it sounds good, and it keeps a little bit more motion. There's a downside of it, and that is it's pretty tough to change chords in a half a beat. So I want to show you something that I do and that is very, very common. And mostly I want to make you see that it's okay to do this. And it's you're going to do what I call sloughing a chord. So if you look in this next example, you'll see that I've used the eighth notes at the end. So I've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then it goes to a C. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then back to a G. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then to a D. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. All right. Now, that probably seems pretty straightforward, but notice what happens when I get it up to speed. It's really hard to make that chord change that fast. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. Okay, you see that's tough. Not only is it tough, it doesn't sound very good. That's because we're just not used to hearing that. It's almost too accurate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Broken down, I'm basically the and is going to be while I'm in transition. And it might end up being just open strings. Okay? Now if I play that slowly and I do something like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Okay? Now that's obviously really, really exaggerated, and you probably wouldn't want to do that. But if I do that exact same thing, just faster, at the pace a song would actually go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You can see that it actually sounds just fine when we do it that way. So I want to make that point that it's totally okay, and basically all I'm doing is just letting go. I'm in the process of changing chords. Now that requires that you kind of separate the two hands a little bit, and some people really, really struggle with that. So if you do, again, slow it down and don't be afraid to 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Even though it's going to sound really bad at a slow tempo because you're just kind of randomly hitting strings, it's all right. If you prefer and if you're able to keep your fingers closer to the fingerboard, you can kind of mute them out as you go. So it's like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you kind of get that sound instead. But it's okay either way. It really is. So let's go back to let's do this example again, and I'm going to do it a couple of times. Now notice that we've got the repeat dots going on, so I'm going to play it through twice. The D chord, you'll notice, has a little bit different strum. I've done 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and I've done that because this is just kind of it's what sometimes might be called a turnaround, but it's the end chord of a pattern. It's the last measure of a pattern, and a lot of times we slightly modify the last chord of a pattern. So the whole thing will sound something like this, and I'll go ahead and do the repeat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 I just kind of left that last one open, assuming you might go someplace else from there. Let's do it now a little more up to speed. A 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and like I say, when you play this stuff really slowly and you just sort of let go, it doesn't sound good. But again, if you're playing it in the process of playing a song, it's going to sound great. In fact, it's almost going to sound preferable to actually making the change that fast. Most people's ear is used to hearing that sort of sloppiness between the chord changes, so we're used to hearing it that way. So if it wasn't that way, it would almost sound awkward. Now, one last thing I just want to tell you about is that there is a shorthand way to write a quarter note tied to an eighth note, and it's called a dotted quarter note. And you'll see this in the manual, and you'll occasionally see me use it. I generally don't use dotted notation, but because it exists and you might see it out there somewhere, I'd like you to know how it's used. It is definitely a shorthand. I think it makes things a little bit more complicated to read, but anytime you dot a note, it's the equivalent of tying on a note half as big. So since an eighth note is half as big as a quarter note, again, it's basic fractional math if you're good at that. Since an eighth note is half as big as a quarter note, a dotted quarter note is a quarter note tied to an eighth note. Later on, you'll see that a dotted eighth note is an eighth note tied to a 16th note. I generally, like I say, I don't use dotted quarter notes. I don't think you'll see very many of them. You will see dotted eighth notes periodically because of the way that a dotted eighth note, 16th note group works. That makes a lot more sense to write than an eighth note tied to a 16th note. That's going to be much later in this course, but we will get there, so I just want to bring it to your attention. So when you feel like you've got that example 2-4 worked out pretty good, come back and then let's do example 2-5. So pause right now if you need to, otherwise let's keep going on. So in example 2-5, we're going to do, basically sort of, like I said, Brown-Eyed Girl, Margaritaville, it's all this kind of, basic strumming stuff. So we're going to have the most popular strum in the world, and I'm going to do it with the 2 eighth notes at the end. So it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and the only chord in this song I think that we haven't seen already is the E minor. And E minor is one of the easiest chords on the planet, so that's kind of nice. It's low E string is open, middle fingers on the 2nd fret of the 5th string, and 3rd fingers on the 2nd fret of the 4th string. So that's how I'm voicing this one. Now, one thing that you will see if you look the first measure, you'll see that I've written out 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then the second measure has what looks kind of like a percent sign. That symbol means do the same thing you did in the previous measure. This is actually really handy because it sort of lets us know you don't have to keep reading this strum pattern. It's just going to be the same thing over and over again, and I really like that. So we're going to have a G for 2 bars, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then a D, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3, and then an A minor, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then a D, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and a G, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and for the D, the next D bar, you'll see I've just got all eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and again, that's sort of one of those, turnaround end of the phrase kind of things. We're just about to repeat. You'll notice at the end of that bar, we're going to repeat back to the beginning again. So this kind of sets that up. So the D is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then we're back to the G, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and G again, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, D again, 1 and 2 and 3, 4, and D again, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and minor, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and D, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and G, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then D, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and now we're going to change the pattern. So we're going to go down to an E minor, and you'll notice that there are 2 ties involved here. So I have 1 and 2 is a tie, so I skip it, and 3. So I'm going to skip both the and of 2 and both 2 and 3, and 4 and. One more time. It's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. A little bit faster. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now I'm going to go to a C. Now what I did here is instead of a quarter note tied to an eighth note, I wrote a dotted quarter note, just so you could kind of see what this would look like. So you can see that it's the dotted quarter, so that's 1 and 2. And then there's an eighth note by itself. You'll notice it has a little flag instead of a beam. And tied to 3, so we'll skip it, and 4 and. So if I put those 2 measures together, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then I'm going to do it again. Notice the kind of percent sign looking thing. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and C, same thing. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and one more, E minor. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and up to the A minor. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and I think I might have made a mistake on that E minor. It's that same strum. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and the A minor. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Then notice that we're going to go to the D, and here I have 1 and 2 and 3, missed because of the strum, and 4 and. So all of that is just most popular strum in the world. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, but we're going to skip 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. This is an awesome pattern for any time where you have 2 bars that end a phrase like this. So it's the most popular strum in the world, but then we tie across the bar line into beat 1 of the next measure, and it sounds really cool. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. It goes on to the G. A little bit faster. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So you're going to want to isolate that probably and kind of learn it by itself. I don't want you to try and read this from start to finish. The reason that these things go in patterns and they repeat that pattern over and over so that you don't have to do that. So one more time on that D, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now continuing on, we're going to come back to the G, most popular strum in the world again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you'll notice this sounds like the beginning again. So D for 2 bars again. 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and A minor. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and D. 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and G. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you'll notice I'm turning it around in the same way again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and on the D, and then we end with a whole note G. And really, when you have a whole note at the end of the song like that, you just sort of hold it as long as it feels comfortable to do so. So let's. I'm going to go through the whole tune now. Nice and slow. I am going to take the repeats, so it'll take a little bit of time, but try and play along with me. Here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. Repeat. 1 and 2 and 3 4 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 3 and 4 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 3 and 4 and 1. All right, now let's do it a little bit faster. This time I'm not going to count as I go. I'm just going to keep a nice steady beat, but I'll count you in. And so you'll hopefully be able to just play right along and not have to hear my voice over top of it. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, that's going to pretty much do it for this lesson. So please take your time and get that down. It's super important, and it's really going to lay the foundation for just about everything else that we're going to do from here on out. Now, if that were a real song, it would probably repeat everything that we just did 3 or 4 or 5 times, depending on how long the song goes. What you'll find is that a lot of my examples are basically the construct of a song, just shorter, because you don't want to just play the same thing over and over and over again, unless you're singing along with it, and then of course it makes perfect sense to do that. So on all of these examples, feel free to repeat the whole thing, and that is exactly what you would do if you were playing a song. So I hope that kind of makes sense to you, and hope you understand. I'm trying to keep the examples at a reasonable length, but at the same time show you enough of the repetition that happens in the real world. So kind of as a little listening exercise on this one, make sure when when you're listening to songs on the radio, for example, and like I said, this would be very similar to something maybe by the Eagles or Brown Eyed Girl or Jimmy Buffett or one of those types of artists. If you happen to listen to any of that, try and start to listen for patterns that repeat and how often they repeat. Rhythmic patterns that repeat over and over and again. If you start to listen for things like that, hopefully you'll start to recognize them, and you'll see just how much repetition is actually common in popular music. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, and I will see you in the next video.